Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Recursive podcast. Our next guest helps startup founders build their mental strength and resilience needed to grow their businesses. Velina Getova is an organizational psychologist, psychotherapist, and a performance coach. She is the founder of NotYourTherapy, which provides psychological support in the workplace. She has a degree in social and organizational psychology from the London School of Economics and is an alumni of the American University in Bulgaria. With more than 10 years in human development, she has worked with multinational corporations, with tech startups, with universities, but also non-profit organizations in Bulgaria, in the US, and the UK. Velina's long-year experience led her to the realization that the most needed skill in the future is not only our ability to learn, but also our ability to manage our interior state. Velina, welcome to the Recursive podcast. I'm very happy that you're here.
Thank you, Irina, for the invitation.
I wonder where to start because you have your startup experience as well. And in a way, it was also the experience where you've learned that this is not you, that you would like to go on a different path. Maybe let's go back to that. Mm-hmm. What did you learn from being part of a startup? And why at some point you had to be honest with yourself and say, this is not my world?
Oh, wow. You're bringing me back a couple of years ago, which feels like 10 or 20, but it was just maybe 4 or 5 years ago. My startup journey was very natural. I would say it wasn't something that I was pursuing from the beginning of my career. It just happened organically, out of opportunity, knowing the right people, having the space, having the knowledge and skills to contribute to the last company that I was part of. It was actually my last job, indeed, before I started NotYourTherapy. And the moment that I realized this is maybe not for me was my everyday experience when I was feeling that constantly. I feel that I'm feeling exhausted, or my energy is never the right state, or that I'm not only out of my comfort zone every day, but out of my talent zone. So there is a very thin difference between being out of your comfort zone, which is amazing. It's great for your growth. It enables you to stretch yourself beyond your abilities, but it's very different than being outside of your talent zone. And for me, it took maybe half a year or a year to understand that it's not just the out of the comfort zone thing and the challenge, but I'm actually out of my talent zone. This is something that you can observe looking inwards, but you can outside with your colleagues, with your co-founders. One thing was energy. Do you constantly feel that you're not having the energy that you want to, that you constantly need to stretch yourself? You're feeling that regardless of your effort, it's never good enough, or it's not the way it should be. And I know my words right now maybe resonate with a lot of people who experience this and think that this is part of startup life, but still, there should be those moments that you feel you're in flow. There should be still those moments that you feel accomplished. There should be still those moments when you feel, I have actually done this right. And for me, it was maybe a whole year of feeling that my energy is not at the levels that I want it to be, regardless of anything I try to do with meditation and fitness and investing in my well-being, because I was constantly out of my talent zone. And I realized that there is a very specific skill set that requires for somebody to be successful in the early stages of a startup, right?
Yeah.
And my skill set and my strengths, so I did different strengths profilers, and also I was already in therapy. I was already in the second year of my psychotherapy degree in education.
Yeah.
And it was a journey of self-discovery and connection with your authentic self, and appreciating your own value and seeing that your skills are in a completely different sphere. And I saw that at that point the company needed something completely different. It's not that my skill set was not valuable, but for this stage of where we are with that company and the challenges that we were facing, there were different skills that were more needed right now, especially in my role. So it was a very tough choice, even though I really loved my job and I loved my team and I felt it was my baby, and it was part because I was an advisor to that company before I joined. So it was a really personal decision. But I saw that I'm not contributing with my talents to the maximum, and it's really costing me my health and my energy.
But I guess you can come to a conclusion like that where you would fairly know your talents, or at least have the confidence that you have these talents. I wonder how many of us never really reach that point. At least me being surrounded also quite often with young people, it often feels like I myself personally, I don't even knew what my talents are until I got 30.
Yeah.
So what is the best way to discover them and to develop also this confidence that, okay, I might not be good for that kind of environment or for that kind of job, but I know that I will be better off, or I will grow according to my talent skill in a different setting. How do you develop this kind of confidence?
I think it definitely comes with maturity and with life experience as well. So genuinely around 30, this is the actual phase of adults growing up emotionally and psychologically, even though we feel that at our 20s we are already adults. So actually we see and from experience that emotionally very often we go through this 30s, like 30-year crisis, reconnecting with our identity. So it's more than natural that we need these first 5 or 10 years of our professional life navigating, experimenting, trying different roles. So actually pushing and trying to have this decision earlier, I'm not sure whether it's maybe the best way to go. I think the best mindset would be to go and experiment with different roles, to try different things, but really with the scientist mindset, with the learner mindset, not with the rigid mindset that I need to find the first thing, and if it's not it, then I'm a failure and that's not for me. With a little bit of a more flexible rather than rigid approach, trying different things. It just really like understanding, making your goal for your first 10 years of your life 5, that my goal is to really see where are my strengths and where I can bring the biggest value. And actually having an answer to that question by the time that you're 30 can be the best possible goal. But I know the pressure from the startup industry is completely different. By the time you're 30, most probably should have had your first startup. You should maybe have already an acquisition or be a manager, buy your own flat and a car and a lot of other things. While I think we should be a little bit more realistic with our expectations from ourselves and from our peers as well. We shouldn't have everything figured out by the time we're 30. For sure. Even though it looks like we should, but
no, I think the journey actually is just at the beginning. Or maybe I was a slow developer, I can't say, but actually I invested a lot of time in studying my interior and understanding who am I and why am I doing certain things the way that I'm doing them, repeating certain mistakes again and again. So I don't think that I was such a slow learner in this sense, but the journey, at least for me, started probably when I was around 30, maybe short before that. Okay, there are so many things that I want to question right now, and trying to put them in my head, but I think I'm going to stay a bit also with the timeline of your career. And ask you about a different experience and a different period in your life. We have here, at least in the podcast, spoken a lot about the culture that was developed in Telerik Progress. Also because in this environment, a lot of entrepreneurs found their own birth and they continued their path afterwards. Many of them are now leading very successful startups here in Bulgaria. And in this sense, you were pretty much part of that journey, and you were also someone who proactively created this culture. I want to ask you, from your perspective, what has been done differently there? How this company became such a fertile ground, first for growth that we have never seen in a Bulgarian tech company before, and second, a fertile ground for so many other entrepreneurs to gain their confidence and to go out in the world and try their own thing. I think around 50 or 60 companies have been created by former employees of Telerik and Progress.
That's such a synchronicity right now, because this question is coming in the right moment, and I'm about to record one video about that soon for another purpose, but it's actually helping me to prepare. So I still believe there are no coincidences. I've been thinking about this week, exactly.
Wow. Okay.
It's weird. It's a bit spooky, to be honest, because that was, for me, that was 10 years ago. So now it's 2023. When I joined the Telerik, it was 2010, and I left in 2013. So that was 13 years ago. One thing that I remember very clearly, it's my journey actually it started before joining the company. I was fresh out of AUBG, out of college, had no experience in HR, in psychology, working with people. Yeah, a little bit because I was in the student radio, but professionally, my major was in business and JMC, in journalism and mass communication. I thought I'm going to be a journalist, and I had a lot of internships in economy media, and I thought I'm going to be in writing and things like that. So I had no idea that I would end up in HR. And I remember my interview with Vasil Terziev and then my manager, my first manager, Christo Georgiev, with whom we actually now work through our other companies. And I remember this interview, which I was completely unprepared. It was my first interview, and it felt so natural. And the moment that I left the interview, I left with this sense, you know how sometimes you go to an interview, to an important presentation, and you leave with this self-doubt or questioning. So did I answer the question correctly? Did I say the right thing? Did I make the right impression? Oh my God, I was asked these very challenging questions. How did I do? And I remember very clearly, I left this interview with a complete sense of relief and like, that was cool. And I left this interview with a sense of belief in myself. And I was like, so HR sounds interesting, because they interviewed me for an HR role and I had no experience in that. And still, in that interview, somehow, Vasil and Christo created an environment that helped me feel capable and competent in something that I was obviously not. So I think creating this environment that leaves you hungry for knowledge. So I left the interview feeling I can do that, and it's interesting, which is, I think, the most important combination for success, because a lot of us sometimes feel, oh, that's very interesting, I want to do it, but I have the belief or the limiting perception, can I do that? Am I prepared? There was no self-doubt out of that experience with them. And they created this environment in that conversation.
Wow, okay.
Which I didn't really maybe reflect on this back then, but now with my experience looking backwards. And when they said, I was sure, when you leave the interview, and then I was waiting at the elevator. I didn't know even Vasil was the CEO. I had no clue who I'm meeting. I was so junior, I just didn't even prepare who am I meeting at that point. And we stayed in front of the elevator, and Vasil showed me his kids on the phone, and we were laughing, and it felt so natural. But I think this is the environment that they created in that company. So it's challenging, it's interesting, but creating a sense of self-belief in employees that you can do that.
Wow. One of those entrepreneurs who came out of the Telerik success was also you. Were you? Yeah?
Yeah.
Because NotYourTherapy is your own venture?
Yes, it is.
Do you see yourself as an entrepreneur? Can you relate to the struggles that maybe also some of your clients are going through?
Yeah, absolutely. Even though I don't employ a lot of people, I'm by myself, and I work with colleagues, with contractors on the different projects. My mentor asked me a couple of years ago when I was building the strategy for NotYourTherapy, and he asked me whether I want to be a businessman or a craftsman. Meaning that, okay, I start in the field of psychology, performance coaching. Do I want to continue doing the artwork, the coaching, the essence, or I want to build a business where most probably I'm going to be managing other people, processes, financing, and stuff like that, and other people will be doing the art. And at that point, I decided I want to be the craftsman. Still 4 years later, I still want to believe that I'm the craftsman, but this doesn't, I still see myself as an entrepreneur as well, because even though I still do the job by myself, there are a lot of similar challenges that I experience in terms of creating a market for myself, having the right value proposition and the right product that is really going to help solve people's challenges. I'm also experiencing a lot of fluctuation in my own self-belief and my own self-esteem, and in the mission, why am I doing this, and however it's very hard. Sometimes you feel that it's you against the world when things get critical. I'm also experiencing difficulties with financing and fluctuations in income and all those things, maybe in a much smaller scale. But still, I do consider myself an entrepreneur because when you look at the definition, I look at the definition of entrepreneurship in the morning. So it means somebody who is mobilizing resources. In my case, I'm mobilizing my contacts, my experience, my knowledge, and everything that I've built, financial resources, in order to create something new with an economic value, and you assume full responsibility for it. So if I take this definition, I definitely do all those three things, but maybe in a smaller scale, not as a CEO of a scale up, but emotionally and psychologically, I do feel I have a similar experience as an entrepreneur.
It's very interesting. In the past couple of podcasts, we somehow always come to the question of what makes an entrepreneur. And I kind of like hear that again and again, that not everybody is, having the right skill set for being an entrepreneur. Pretty much from what I've heard, it boils down to the ability or the readiness to take on risk. But I still want to hear from your perspective, having also the experience now of building a business, but maintaining, your expertise as being an artist or the crafts person in this business, going into contact with also so many leaders and so many startup founders. What is necessary for an entrepreneur to be a good one or to be a healthy one? I don't know how to even phrase the question. Actually, these are two different questions,
yes.
I think.
Let's split them. So one is what does it take for an entrepreneur to be successful at entrepreneurship? And what was the other one? To be a healthy one. Do it in a healthy and sustainable way. Okay, I'll maybe try to answer both. Because they are related. So I think in my mind, being healthy and successful is the same thing. I first want to start with that because in our understanding in society, what I see in the hustling startup culture, sometimes these two go in the opposite directions in our perception, but they're not. And I think we first have to start with understanding that being healthy and successful is the same thing. If you're successful but not healthy, that's not success. And if you're healthy but not successful, well, depends on your values. But again, if you do have ambitions and goals and you want to have an impact in the world, but if you don't have the physical, mental, emotional health to do that, what kind of success we are talking about? So the first thing starts with this idea that you can have it all. And I remember, I just mentioned to you, I attended Mind Valley University, and Vishen Wakiani, he's a very successful entrepreneur. Already he built an amazing personal development platform. He quoted Sister of Zuckerberg, who said, so there are a couple of things in life. You have health, family, relationships, freedom, innovation. You have to pick three and focus on that. That's a myth that we create ourselves, and I believe we should start being a little bit more courageous and think we can have it all, but maybe not in the same time.
Okay.
So it first starts with this idea, combining and integrating those aspects of entrepreneurship, being healthy and successful. It's one and the same thing. The answer to your question starts with, let's look at the propensities or the specific traits. There's a lot of research already looking into that. Entrepreneurs, people who start, they're not necessarily the ones that are going to stay as CEOs long term. We're speaking about early entrepreneurs, right? People who they usually walk a very thin tightrope between self-belief, or someone would even say arrogance or extreme confidence or hubris, and self-doubt, being critical, being self-critical, being curious, what I mentioned, being having a learner mindset. And the combination of these two different mental states is very challenging. To be able to be humble and curious and have a learner and challenge yourself and have the mindset that maybe very often you're wrong and there are better ways of doing things, but at the same time, having a very strong, deeper self-belief that no matter what happens with the business, you're going to be okay. So I think having this delicate balance between these two mental states is fundamental. So you don't go into either of the extremes. It starts with having a healthy self-esteem, which we know starts with, your first couple of years in your family, even in the womb. But that's maybe a whole different story. We can elaborate more on that later on. So that's one thing. And the second thing, in order to be healthy, we know the founder syndrome about people who identify with their business 100%, and then they don't have a life or other identities outside of it. I can see, even from our Eastern European context and our startup environment, when we look at the profiles of the most successful people, I'm sure people that you are interviewing, we're going to see that they have also other very well-developed identities. It's not just the founder of the business. They also their fathers, mothers. They're also friends, daughters, skiers, surfers, people from Varna, Romanians, and they do belong to different groups that they also relax, and they also serve as a support system for their success in the business. So I think the successful founders really have the skill to first not take things personally and have this very healthy emotional detachment. So giving 100% of your effort, but emotionally detaching from the results, which is very, very difficult. And having other identities and spheres of life where you also achieve and you feel your sense of belonging, a sense of appreciation. So no matter what happens in the business, you still have a ground, solid foundation for where you are.
I wonder if this idea of the founder who is 100% identified with their job, who might be even sleeping in their offices. I mean, we hear a lot of myths about Elon Musk. Also others, is it a realistic, are they let's say, the extraordinary founders who can actually do that? One of a small percentage of people who can actually live by this way? Are they outliers, or have we built a totally wrong idea of what a startup entrepreneurship is about? What do you think? When you speak about it, you do make me remember that most of the successful founders that are here in our region, they usually have a family. They usually have
at least one or few kids.
They usually have also a hobby that they're really passionate about.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's usually kind of like a sport, if it's kite surfing or tennis or something similar.
Or climbing mountains. Yeah.
Yeah, or climbing mountains. Yeah. Then how did we develop this wrong idea of the sociopathic entrepreneur who is sleeping in their offices and has a totally crashed personal life and is eating pizza? I don't know. When did we develop that?
So I've been pondering the same question, and I think the issue is individual, but also it's both individual and societal and contextual. So there are different factors. Parenting style, generational specifics that we have, the environment. So I can speak only from my experience and my perspective, but I guess it's a much more complex question. How did we end up? I think, I wanted to answer something on the first point, but I'm going to get back to this. Even Elon Musk, I think there is more recent interviews that he actually did an experiment with himself. I'm going to try to find the interview, maybe post it as a comment, that he experimented with a period of his life where he slept around 4 hours or less. But after that, he also, he challenged himself and he looked at how the results really in the company was starting to decrease and his own personal abilities. So that's, even for him, that was something that was damaging in the long term, and it wasn't sustainable. I'm going to find this interview and I will share this with the audience. So there is a small percentage of people who have a specific DNA, in their DNA, they're born this way, that they can survive with less than 7 hours of sleep chronically, consistently over time. But this percentage is around 1 or 2. I have to check the data. I think it was in Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep. The rest of us, a regular human being, 99% of the population need between 7 and 9 hours, and that's it. So sometimes, we do get overwhelmed and excited about these role models, but biologically, this is what the science and and our human experience shows. So expecting that we're going to be this 1% is a bit egocentric, isn't it? Expecting that each one of us is born with this capability, it's a very little probability that we're among this 1%. Mm-hmm. And on the other part of the question, how did we end up here? I think, again, it's a parenting style from the West, 30, 40 years, 50 maybe. In Bulgaria, in specific, entrepreneurship is very much related to the economic development after the changes, the democratic changes. So our generation had this unseen opportunity at the same time, and in a way, we realized a lot of the dreams of our parents, where maybe not of our parents or grandparents had opportunity to go to school, to study in university, to get involved in the knowledge economy. And all of a sudden, we are the first or second generation who are involved in the knowledge economy. And that's why for our parents, it's so important that we do stuff with our minds, we have a good degree, we build something meaningful, and we use our skill set. So in a way, I'm looking at our Eastern European culture. We have this legacy on a national cultural level as well, that you want to make it up. And on a psychological level, I think we, generation that is growing, Generation Y and Z, we have a lot of freedom, but we also are maybe the most lost generation, because what was keeping our sense of self stable before were very solid social and social family economic framework. So the institution of the family was very rigid. We know, for example, if you are born in, a small village in Eastern Europe, and your father is a ship owner and has a farm, most probably you're also involved in the farm. There's very little choice about what you do for a career. You follow what's in the family for generations. And for the first time, we have a very flexible social framework, family framework, and we have a lot of freedom to find ourselves in this world, which is a responsibility that we are not always ready to assume in those early years of our 20s, because a lot of things are not defined. Before, a lot of the things were predefined for us. What you work, who you marry, what you do. And now a lot of things are undefined, and we have to define them. And we're not always prepared for this. And the choice, the paradox of choice, we know it gives you a lot of freedom, but sometimes we can't. And once we create a venture or something that we have made ourselves, it's a free choice, but at the same time comes with this sense of, this is your mission in life. This is something that you created. This is something that you designed for yourself. And that's why it's very, very difficult to detach, because it's a personal choice. It's not something that was defined for you. It's something you made for yourself. That's on the psychological issue, I guess. Other people can elaborate more on the social and economical.
In your practice, you work mostly with leaders, and many of them are actually founders of startup companies. Now, knowing all these preconceptions that we have about startup culture and still trying to adapt it to our reality and culture also in Southeast Europe, I wonder, how difficult is it for you to assess if the culture in one company is healthy or not? How do you see the flaws or the things that are not going well? Which are the main symptoms that also usually fall into the foreground?
So a healthy founder most probably create a healthy culture, right?
Okay.
Only one. On the previous example, I just thought of an example with the client, so maybe I'm going to mention it afterwards, because I do have right now an example in my mind. I would say a healthy culture is the one where, what I see from my experience being in organizations and consulting, is if the dialogue changes once the leader comes in terms of content and tone, that means there is an issue. If the dialogue is the same, so we continue talking about the same things and with the same tone and voice, regardless of whether the founder is there or not, it's a symptom of a healthy culture. It's the same whether we're going on with the same ways of doing business, whether the founder is there or not. So if we're just doing our usual thing, even if the leader is not there, again, it's a sign of a healthy culture. It means that we know what is our role, we have assumed responsibility, we don't need we don't need pressure or guidance. We have this internal locus of control. We understand the values, we understand what's expected of us, and we feel that the leaders have trust in us to do our jobs. Very often the dialogue and the conversation change. There is one conversation when people are just hanging out on the balcony or during a team building or something. When the leader comes, if the dialogue changes, then there is an issue. So that's one.
That's interesting.
That's one thing. And I've seen it sometimes when I speak to founders, when I have a coaching, because sometimes when we do performance coaching, I look at it from a systemic point of view, because it's never just the person, right? So we have to look at how this person communicates and interacts with the others. And when I speak to the leader, and then I speak to his team and to other stakeholders, to the co-founders, and then you get this 360 view, you can see sometimes there are some discrepancies. And maybe the other thing for a healthy culture is knowing that we have each other's back. And if I do a mistake, that's not going to be used against me in the future. So even if you fail, if you do a mistake, if you say something that is not correct or something, that's not going to be used against you in the future. And I think that's a real example of how we should tolerate failure, because sometimes in startup cultures we say, oh yeah, we embrace failure and everything. Yes, of course. But are we going to use this as a...
That's interesting.
You see what I mean?
That's very interesting. Recently, someone said to me that kind of like stuck with my mind, that in a way, giving but also receiving feedback is a skill set. It's not something that comes naturally.
Yes.
And especially with people who are not always confident, receiving feedback can be a very painful experience. I kind of like started seeing that a bit more when I moved back to Bulgaria. I don't know if it's a comparison that I can actually make, but also talking to other leaders who were not necessarily coming from here, they would say, oh, why are Bulgarians actually always so defensive? I don't know if it's a thing. Maybe you can make the comparison, but I always felt like we're really bad at, receiving negative feedback. I remember how crushed I felt when I was 23 and my boss was giving me like, not really hard time, but, sharing a certain disappointment or I did something wrong. It felt like I was worth nothing. And it took me years and years of practice to come to the conclusion that, yeah, sometimes I would fail, but it wouldn't mean that I'm a bad professional or whatever. It is really hard job to do. So I wonder how these things correlate with the, of course, romantic idea of how we're going to embrace failure. And I hear that a lot. And at the same time, for me as a leader, it's sometimes really challenging to give negative feedback, but you can't not do it, because you still want people to grow, to do certain things better over time. And it's a very thin line. I don't know how you navigate on that.
I think it comes back again to how emotionally you are attached to what you do and how you see your value as a result of the results in your business. And believing that, mistakes don't really leave this imprint. We feel that they sometimes leave a print on our identity or on our value as a person. Well, if we do really believe we are with a growth mindset, a mistake is just a mistake. We focus on the learning. It doesn't have a significant impact on my self-worth as a human being. And I think it really starts from there. As I mentioned, having this solid, grounded in reality self-esteem, and which gives you a lot of openness towards feedback. But also, I think because Bulgarians, we are very communal. So what is negative feedback? Negative feedback, if we look at it from a psychological perspective, in a very basic terms, can be perceived as a rejection from the peer group, if you decide to perceive it this way. And a rejection...
Yeah, you don't really decide. In most of the cases, you actually react very automatically.
Yeah, that's why I say, that's a little bit of mental fitness, what I'm talking about. Yeah. We always have a choice. And I think with feedback, critical feedback, it's about our perception of it, whether we're going to see it as a gift, as something that adds on our value, or it's something that reaps off of our value. And if we look at it, that's why we can't really change the construct. We can teach people how to give it, of course, but it's always learning how to receive it first that makes a big difference. And because we are a very communal society, we are very much oriented towards being perceived and accepted by the group. And as you say, on an automatic level, if we don't work on ourselves, if we perceive criticism as a threat for my belonging to the group, on a psychological level, this really triggers the amygdala. It could say, actually, you might die. Because thousands of years ago, if you're rejected by the group, you have the potential to die. So it's a very automatic process that we have to enlighten a little bit and to see where our reactions come from and maybe change our perspective on feedback. Because right now, even if you give your employee, even when I give to my clients feedback, critical feedback, or we do coaching session, I challenge them. I challenge very often. It's a gift, nothing's going to happen. You leave the session and no one knows about it. Just you and me. It has no impact. You're still going to have food on the table. You're still going to be a parent. You still have someone to hug tonight. You still have where to live, So looking at our perceptions and what we make feedback mean for us and our identity is very important. And people who hold things lightly are much more flexible and open. And I remember even from that startup that I worked with, we had one colleague, she was using this negative inquiry tool. I actually suggest everybody to check it out.
What
negative
is this?
Inquiry. So when someone gives you a negative feedback, for example, now we look at the interview afterwards and you say, well, Veli, look here, maybe you didn't allow enough space to listen to my question, or you respond very fast on something and didn't work out. Instead of putting the shield, that wasn't my intention. Immediately, the defense mechanisms wants to make us right. So we want it to be, because we want to be accepted, we want to belong. Instead of defending ourselves, we can be curious and say, all right, I wasn't aware I was doing that. Tell me more. So instead of closing, even physically, I actually challenge my clients sometimes to open up to the physical experience of receiving critical feedback with curiosity. So tell me more. Where exactly did I do? Show me, I want to know. And this completely shifts the dynamic in the conversation. But it takes a little bit of courage to stay in the discomfort. Yeah, I'm not saying it's completely comfortable to open yourself, but we entrepreneurs, we do a lot of uncomfortable things, right?
We do, yeah.
So it's about tolerating a little bit and learning, okay, it's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's...
long years ago, I had a colleague, he was actually a graphic designer, but in his private life, he was, I think, learning karate, but I'm not sure, or kung fu, something martial arts. In any way, he was teaching me a lot about communication by making metaphors that he learned actually from martial arts. And I remember at some point I was talking to someone, the other person was rather judgmental, and it was a repeating pattern. So the other day would be judgmental again and again. And I was trying different things of how to deal with that, because it felt also very personal, the whole judgment. I remember at some point I decided, you know what? I'm not going to be the person that is currently attacked. I just imagined it in my head. If I look at the situation, and that would be me who is being attacked now. This is the other person who is actually, throwing all this judgment. And then I decided I'm going to step away from the situation and I'm going to observe what is really happening here. But I stepped away from the person who was actually attacked and who was experiencing all this pain of the judgment at this point. And it was amazing because I didn't have to react. I didn't have to put myself in this defensive mechanism. I could just say, well, I'm going to take this judgment for now, and I'm going to decide at a later point if I'm going to work with that or not. I'm just going to, receive it, keep it, but I'll decide afterwards if you're right or not. Yeah. I don't even need to respond right now. And it was amazing also for me at this point. But I think because you said it's a decision, I think we first need to work pretty much on making it a decision, creating the space between perceiving the situation and then reacting on it.
Viktor Frankl beautifully put it between stimulus and response.
Exactly.
There is this space.
I didn't want to put it that scientifically.
Yeah.
So do you think that in order to create the space, we need to dive deep into our patterns that were created quite often in our childhood, most probably were by the first caregivers, parents, or whoever that actually was? Or could we just do it with a certain meditation and coaching and, performance exercises? I don't know. How deep is one must be ready to go in order to study themselves and learn how to deal with certain patterns? I don't know. Did I put my question correctly?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Is there,
Do we need to do the psychotherapy every time, or can we just do some coaching? I think a lot of people are actually looking for, an easy...
Oh, they want to go do a psychedelic rituals session and just, cut through it.
We're looking for the shortcuts, and somehow we always want to perform and perform and perform. Yeah. And even if we do the psychedelics, we're going to do it in order to increase our performance, which is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, to get the shortcut, as I say, to therapy rather than the, deep.
Are there shortcuts in therapy?
I guess it depends on how big the pain is.
Okay.
So what I've seen, motivation, just like in entrepreneurship, comes with personal pain. If your pain is very big, you have a big motivation to dig deeper. Mm-hmm. Some people are addicted to pain, but that's another story. But it really depends on our motivation and how big of an impact we see as a result of this dysfunction that we observe in our behavior. Or I'm going to give you an example. Like, I had a client who was basically, he actually approached me so I can coach his colleague, not himself.
Okay, interesting.
It usually happens like that. So first I'm coaching somebody else, and then we actually get to the person that we really need to coach, but that's okay. And I remember we had a discussion in 2020 where we spoke about the other person, but we also discussed a little bit about the dynamics in between the two and their company. And it was very clear at that point that this other founder, in my points, he was also having some struggles with his own well-being and his expectations of himself and everything. And he took this role of a savior and the solver and the fixer, and he was there for everybody. And really enjoyed. You could see from the way he speaks about his business. He really enjoyed his leadership. He really enjoyed being the savior. Okay. He derived a lot of self-worth in being in this role, who is always there to solve the problem and to save other people. It was a big part of his identity. But at that point, the pain was not big for him because the business was kind of running okay. People were happy. There were no, so the pulse surveys, they were showing some issues, but generally there were good results, engagement, clients were happy. They just had some confounder things. And at that point, the pain was not so big, so he wasn't motivated at all to look at it. I actually questioned him a little bit. Well, he said, I have my tools to deal with that. I understand. Can you coach my colleague? The colleague wanted to be coached, which was great. So I coached the colleague. And then 2 years later, the colleague was okay. The company was there were some challenges. However, that person was already, he was experiencing physical symptoms. Insomnia was already part of his everyday for months. And at that point, he wasn't in a state to really continue with his role. And they had to make a very difficult decision that actually the other co-founder would step in as a CEO, and he had to step back. And then the pain was big, as you can imagine.
Because he lost a whole part of his identity, I guess.
It was a process. It was part of the coaching, stepping down from that role, but still being part in, because he didn't leave he's just stepping down from the operational role. And it was a process where we had to find a new role for him, but also give him the space to work on his well-being, because he had arthritis, he had physical symptoms of anxiety, and other things from chronic stress that we observe very much, not only on the psychological level, but on the physical level as well. So he really needed time to heal. And it was a process of really redefining my own identity, finding my space in the business. And then the pain was really big, and the motivation likewise.
It was also big.
Yeah. And then we actually had a conversation, and I was like, can you imagine what could have happened if we started doing something different in 2020 when we met? And I had a little bit of personal, that's when I need to work on my boundaries, because I felt a bit guilty that I didn't probe more.
You didn't, okay.
But we're learning from our mistakes, right? So,
which brings me also to another topic where I feel like we need to debunk maybe some preconceptions. So lately we talk a lot about burnout.
No, oh my God. Yeah.
First of
I
all,
think it's the peak of the iceberg.
It is the peak of the iceberg.
What about other things
exactly.
as well underneath?
And it's very weird because we talk a lot about it. I think we kind of like accepted that this is a real thing. But at the same time, most of us, I don't think they know what that is. I know that you also had your personal experience with burnout. Is it something real with leaders and entrepreneurs? Is that something that is happening, or is it quite often also mixed up with, I don't know, a depression or...
So they're very different individual cases. I think everybody has their own experience, but burnout is a real thing. It's a phenomenon. It's already defined by the World Health Organization as an existing human condition, which happens in the context of work. So it's no joke, for sure. Very often it is accompanied by other symptoms, and especially if we catch it at the later stages. The final stages of burnout, because there are different stages. One scientist said there are 12. The updated model is 5 stages of burnout. Usually in the final stages of burnout, the clinical picture and the symptoms and everything is very similar, like depression.
Okay.
Almost like the same experience and symptoms we observed in both cases. So they very much go together also with a heightened sense of anxiety, with low self-esteem. For some people can be accompanied already by some form of physical condition, which is also, from my point of view, related to the emotional stress, like an autoimmune disease or, as I said, chronic arthritis or back pain. Or I have had so many clients coming with stomach aches, reflux, or chronic migraines, unexplained by all the GPs, all the doctors, and then they're going through all of these different scans and expensive tests in order to find out that physically there is no obvious reason, and it starts with chronic levels of stress and unprocessed emotions. So it's never just one thing. For me, my personal experience, I've written about it. For me, it was burnout, chronic pharyngitis. That's why I even mentioned before the interview that I still, from that point, I have a chronic pharyngitis, and I have to always look after my throat because it's throat chakra. It's my weak spot, and I have to look after it. But for 2 months, I lost my voice, and I was speaking like this. Even though I tried to go back to work after I left the startup, I tried, and the moment I was getting some contracts, my voice was. It was what kind of sign, what kind of more obvious sign do you need in order to hear that the body says no? Gabor Mate has this beautiful book on chronic stress and physical illness. So for me, it was that, and also I had a miscarriage. And all of that happened within 2 or 3 months. So it's never just one thing. And we have to be very curious about the real reasons, internal psychological, our own mental models and learnings and trauma and experiences we have, but also environmental.
But stress is also such a fuzzy thing, because in certain cases stress can be good stress. It could be an excitement. It could be something that is actually pushing you forward. When does it become, this destructive thing on your psyche and also on your body? And how do we discriminate between the two?
So it's the good and the bad stress levels. The bad stress, I think there is a lot written on this, and I would explain it this way. Just like we go to lift weights, we need recovery afterwards, because during rest, the physical and mental muscles recover. We are secreting the growth hormone, which integrates short-term memory into long-term memory. It allows the muscle to grow. The same is with psychological tension. The best performers in business, in arts, and in sports follow the growth equation, which is high stress with high rest. So these iterations can give you the resilience to continually stretch your muscles, mental or physical, so you can take up more and more and more. But following, it could be shorter periods of stress, but they should be intense, and it should be real release. While once you're running a business, you feel that the whole thing of 10 years is like one iteration. I very much give example in Agile. In Agile, we're building software on iterations, right? You have a sprint of 2 weeks, then you do retrospective, replanning for the next sprint. Very often what I see in the growing companies, we have the sprints, it finishes on Friday, we're fixing things on a Sunday, Monday, and we're already in the next, and it's the next and the next and the next. And we are not learning how to build these micro moments of rest and switching off. I interviewed recently, a couple of years ago, I was working with, I'll mention his name, if that's okay. You know, he gave me this interview online, Thibaut Taitinger, the founder of Puzzle Co-working. And he's working very hard. And he's somebody that, I mean, obviously people who have worked with him, they know this. And I interviewed him, what was his secret? And he basically said sleep. So he always prioritized sleep, no matter he could work like 12 or 14 hours a day. In the evening, he had built this very effective technique to mentally switch off so he can have a very solid and quality sleep. So building those, it could be sleep, meditation, exercise, time off, me time, journal, whatever it is, allowing your mind also to recover and to mentally switch off is very fundamental. And what happens in startups is that we never have this complete switch off experience. We're always on. It's always the next thing. It's always we bring our problems home and the mind is working, the so-called, you are tired but wired.
Yeah.
And this is what makes it chronic over time. It's not the crisis. There is a beautiful saying, we're all idiots are great in crisis, but we suffer in daily life. So it's about building these individual rituals, but also with our teams, to rotate high stress with high rest. That's the beauty of thing, because high stress, it has its, it mobilizes, it excites us, but it should be, short term on iterations.
I
What I mean?
I don't know how real that is for other entrepreneurs, but I personally sometimes get really afraid that I might be leading the whole organization to a burnout. And it's very weird. Sometimes I wonder, is it somehow connected to how I feel and I'm just projecting on my team? Or especially in the remote culture, it's very difficult to grasp who is where right now. Who has the good stress, who has the bad stress. I mean, it's clear that it's going to be stressful.
Yeah.
But how do you develop that as a leader towards your teammates? I find it extremely difficult.
It is definitely difficult because we are always subconsciously projecting our experiences onto our colleagues. And the first thing is we need to know that our every behavior, every word we say and every word we don't say, it has a weight. Even if we have this complete flat structure, if everybody feels like the whole team, if there is like the founder is there with the team, we have to realize as leaders, even if we are 5 people, our role model, our example has an imprint, it has an impact, whether we like it or not. And it's about embracing this responsibility. So I have seen different cases. I have seen cases in where the lack of boundaries, unpreparedness and unwillingness of the founder to manage stress or inability to manage his or her emotions, you could see that this pattern, the leader has this pattern, and this is setting an example, and this is what his colleagues perceive as a formula for success, because he's the father, he's the role model figure. So if this is how things are done in the startup, so I should be like that. I have seen this model where the model is replicated. I have seen another situation where, because the founder has a paternalistic or savior style of leadership, he's assuming usually he's lacking boundaries, he's saving everybody else, it's a lot of his shoulders. Well, actually his or her employees are like, saving at 5, they know the leader is going to take care of it, they know if they fail, he's going to jump in with the call with the client and solve everything. So I've seen the other dynamic, that the founder is assuming much more, and he's protecting and shielding the team, which is also not a healthy dynamic. So I guess it's about having a clear conversation and observing how people are really there are different tools that are out there. Our partners from Camp Light develop a beautiful tool which is free. You can measure the emotional climate during sync meetings, especially for remote teams. And it's a great way to see how people are emotionally over time, and use this as a start for a conversation in a one-on-one setting. So we have to be conscious. And another thing, maybe we have to see whether we're doing certain things for our employees, for our colleagues, or for ourselves, in terms of boundaries, decisions, leadership style.
Interesting. Okay.
So am I trying to protect them, or am I trying to take off their plate because they really need it, or because I need it in order to...
I'm giving... It's very interesting how we often give others exactly the thing that we need and cannot give ourselves.
That's it. We become the leaders that we never had or we wanted to have for ourselves. And of course, we also become the parents whose love we crave the most as little. And we integrate that figure and we replicate and project it into our work relationships as well. Or the other thing we've seen, I've very often seen when we go in the deeper level, I've seen founders who actually have a problem with the father figure, for example. They had very poor connection with the father, is the rejected family figure. And then they would do everything possible not to be like the father. But once we look at the reality, they actually replicate very similar behaviors with their colleagues. And it's not about rejecting that family figure, it's about integrating and making peace with it. And then their behavior shifts in the startup. So it's sometimes you just have to go deeper on the previous question.
I totally subscribe to that. Also, this is probably one of the reasons why I decided to undergo my way. It was stemming from a work situation where I think I had therapy before, but I never really, did it in a consistent way. At some point, I would just stop because it was also back then when I was younger, it was just way too expensive. I just couldn't afford it to do it for years. But I remember at some point where, someone said, you need to work on certain topics individually. You can't really do it in the organization or with your co-founder or whatever. And with the strong wish also to be a good leader, I needed to go back to myself and first understand how am I going to lead myself, because it was a chaos in some way. I needed to put myself first in some kind of order in order to create a whole organization and be a role model. And still, I have a question here. So
I very much admire this, to be honest, like the way you're speaking openly about this. I think this sets a great example, Irina.
Well, I guess the pain was also huge. In my case, so I guess everyone has their own individual path to go. I see lately mental health, mindfulness are becoming more and more a popular topic anywhere I go. I was just on a retreat last weekend, and all of them were actually leaders of organizations. We were speaking about responsible leadership. A lot, of course, to do with regenerative businesses or businesses that can actually regenerate nature, sustainability. These were the topics. But when you start talking to the leaders, a lot of them would be engaged in some kind of practice that is helping them with their interior, from psychotherapy up to psychedelics and integrating that. So I think it is becoming also something that is modern. But I wonder something else, and what would you say? So I think it's inevitable as a leader to have also your difficult periods. For me, I always feel like I have this magic mind, and sometimes I'm able to manifest certain things with my magic mind, but at some point it just wears off. And in my formula here is I prefer to stay away also from colleagues, so that I don't... It feels to me sometimes that my mental state is affecting also the others in the organization. It's like a snowball. When I'm not feeling well, then it somehow, it creates a certain vibe in the team as well. So how should leaders behave when they're not at their best, when they're actually at their lowest point? What would you do so that the organization, so that you're responsible towards the organization? I wonder also, could you rely on your colleagues also to lift you up? Is it the role of teammates and employees to support their leaders? I don't know. How do we deal with that?
I guess it really depends on the structure of the startup and the culture as well. If you do have co-founders, that's why we see that's usually a co-founder team of at least 2 people. They have more resources. It's like in a marriage, it's never 50-50, isn't it? Sometimes one founder is pulling 20 and the other 80, and then it's the other way around. So I would say first, if you do have co-founders who you can lean on in that moment, it's the co-founders. Our teammates, and especially people who are not shareholders in the business, who are employees, we should be very conscious of sharing and asking them for lifting us up for our own purposes, because we have to remember what is the purpose of why we are here. We're here to do business. I'm creating value. I'm creating jobs for these people. Why is this the place for me to get therapy? We should remember, it depends on what's the culture of the business. I've seen some startups that are completely like, a family, and they share everything. They know who slept with whom and But usually we have to remember that, as I said, an entrepreneur is someone who assumes responsibility. And there are moments, of course, where we are weak and we should lean in, and we can get support, at least emotional understanding from our employees as well, our colleagues. But if we see that consistently we are oversharing, we're looking for this emotional support somewhere where it's not its place, that's the moment to look up in the mirror and find support in your mentors, in your advisors, in a coach or a therapist. I would say how much you need to share when you're not in the right state as a leader. In order to get the answer to this question, you need to ask, what information my colleagues need from that about that, so that they can go on with their business and they can be okay. Am I sharing to vent and to feel understood, or I share because I want to avoid misunderstanding? I'll give example of one. I think he was the CEO of an American bank, who I read about him in the book, The Strengths-Based Leadership by Gallup, where that person had a very difficult moment in his career while he was serving as a CEO. His wife got breast cancer in a very later stage. So, of course, this affects the whole family system. And he was very aware that this is going to affect his emotions and his cognitive abilities and his sleep and everything in the next 6 months ahead. And then he was very strategic about what he shares with with the other leaders, but also with the rest of the company, so that people would know, first, what does it mean for them? If I'm in a bad mental state as a startup, what does it mean for how much they can rely on, when I'm going to be available? Are going to be times when I'm going to be absent? They need to know the reason. So if I have to share about my own experience in mental state, I should always try to share with my colleagues as much as they need to know for their value and the benefit of the business, so everybody can go on. Because at that point, what you really need as a founder is your business going well, right? If you're in a bad state, you don't want to transfer. You need to, if the company is going okay, you need this healthy will to go on, to take you through your difficult moment, even if you have if you're going through a divorce or something in your personal life.
Yeah, they don't want to create cascades.
You don't want to cascade it. So
yeah, of course.
Share as much as you think will be valuable for your colleagues to know.
I was actually very inspired by a leader of a company that I talked recently, and he's been going through different phases of depression in his life. It is something that is just part of life, and of course every now and then it just happens. But I think for the first time in the last phase, he decided that he's going to be speaking openly about it. And he actually said to the colleagues and to the organization, said, look, I'm going to go through a depressive state. I don't know how long it is going to take, but I might not pop up in many meetings. I might not be available. Don't be scared. I just need to find my way to deal with it. And it actually, he went through the whole phase very fast in comparison to other periods, but he was open about it.
This is what I'm saying, 100%. Be open about it, and share what people can expect from you. But being open to the extent that is valuable and useful for the people around you. If you're too open, like as I said, if you're too open in a way that you're venting and you're searching for getting emotional support, maybe you have overshared. But if you're open and honest about what people can expect from you, how this is going to affect his mood and their interactions, people have the right to know. And the best way is really to be authentic. And this is what the CEO did as well. He shared the journey, he shared how he was feeling, and he was very authentic about how this is going to impact his working hours, his moods potentially, so that people around you wouldn't be, as you say, suspicious. Oh, why is he upset right now? Or why he's not here? And a lot of the times we create movies in our heads that are very far from reality. So the authentic way is the best way to go, to an extent that is valuable and useful for your colleagues.
We're at the end of the conversation, but that's a question that right now I feel like I cannot not ask. And that's the question of authenticity, because I think a lot of it is actually related to that.
Yeah.
So we have established these models of what a startup founder looks like, smells like, and dresses like, and so on and so forth, which don't really help us sometimes. I think they're also partially one of the reasons why some of the leaders are moving straight to burnout at some point. It is totally unrealistic. We have established in our heads also from early childhood what a mother and a father of organization would actually look like. So we kind of like start unconsciously replicating the models of our parents. In this quest, still we know that the best leaders are usually those who are the authentic ones, who have in some way actually found their essence and they're living it in their role. What is your best tip for that? Without reading all the biographies of the successful, CEO founders and, leaders that we know of today, how do you find your authentic leader in you? And it's regardless if you're a woman or a man, because I think this is, again, a next level of complexity. We don't need to tap into this topic right now, but how do you go to your authentic self and realize it also as a leader?
Maybe the one thing I can recommend, and I still recommend for myself, is having quiet time with yourself. There was a French philosopher who said that some of the biggest problems in the world came from a person's inability to stay quiet in a room by themselves. Regardless of what works for you, meditation, therapy, whatever, sometimes even just journaling or having your coffee quiet in the morning for a couple of minutes by yourself. I think this is scarce right now. Me time, quality me time in the quiet, with my thoughts, with my body sensations, with my gut. Interoception, not only introspection, but interoception, looking with the senses inward, what's happening. I think this is very expensive, very difficult to find, but I think it makes the biggest difference to connect with this authentic self. Having those even few minutes a day to be by yourself.
I love that. I love that. It made me also thinking of all the tools that we're using for communication and how I think, especially as a leader, because you're kind of like a demanded person from all sides. You just wake up and your inbox is full. Yeah. And you constantly feel like you need to respond. Wow. Okay. I feel like we could go on.
Me too.
But still, I actually promise you that we will be finished by now. So I guess we might consider doing a second episode, which could be also a bit more focused on other topics. This was more like an introduction into the topics. I'm going to finish maybe like that, because you were speaking about the mission and how we actually also strongly identify with the mission. So from NotYourTherapy, what is your mission? Where do you want to, how do you want to contribute to a better world? I'm going to phrase it like that.
I personally first want to create understanding in Bulgaria about these topics. So I'm starting local, trying to be a bit more humble maybe here. I would love to have an impact in the world and change the world, but I want to start changing my environment.
Bulgaria is part of the world,
yes,
so
yes,
it's still valid.
I see these specifics in Bulgaria, in my community is the IT in the entrepreneurship world. I want to start leaving an impact there. I want to see more companies where people are happy, more leaders who have great success in making money, making an impact, but having healthy families and enjoying
and
the
not
way.
Three burnouts behind.
Not burnout, no depression, not bipolar, because we spoke only about burnout, but there are lots of research actually showing that there are other mental health conditions very often associated with the entrepreneurship part, like anxiety, ADHD, substance abuse, bipolar. Just burnout is like the hottest topic, but just many more others. And I wish it's a different way, starting here locally. And and I do see, because we are also a very lifestyle oriented. I mean, we are very ambitious, but I still think we are this bohemic culture that we enjoy having time with friends. We enjoy our beautiful nature. We enjoy having great food and drinks. And I believe it's in our core Bulgarians to enjoy life. And I want to see more entrepreneurs who succeed and make an impact into the bigger world, but they're still true to this core that we are enjoying life. And my mission is really to show this pathway and to go through this pathway for myself and with my clients, for themselves and with their businesses, because most of my friends work in those companies. My children will one day work in those companies, so I want this reality. And I think it's going to have a ripple effect, because I see a lot of talented entrepreneurs and minds creating world impact from Bulgaria. So, and I see some of my clients, they're consulting on software issues. Their clients, but very often they consult them on organizational issues. So I do believe that subtly this mindset, this knowledge is also transferring worldwide.
And it's permeating actually every aspect of our life lately, isn't it? It's how I feel, at least.
Yeah.
Anyway. And sometimes we talk about business and how difficult it is of being, an entrepreneur or a founder. And what we really talk about are exactly these mental health issues.
I wanted, if we have an interview 10 years later, like from now on in 10 years, I would love us to talk more about entrepreneurship and joy.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship and building a family, how they go together. Yeah. And, more on the positive side. So, prevention and enjoyment.
That's actually a good goal.
Yeah.
Let's do the next one.
Yes.
A more joyful one.
Yes.
Thank you, Velina. Thank you for being here and also joining the podcast. I'm sure that we will continue the discussion at some point in the podcast, but also maybe with other activities. I have some things in mind because I admire your mission and I believe it's an important one. And I'm curious myself.
Thank you. I'm excited about this as well.
And if you are just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.